Hello, just a quick note before the show starts to say that we recorded our section on the headlines before the Tier 4 announcements for England, so I think most of the discussion around that is still relevant, but just a heads up that we didn't know that at the time of this recording, and so that's why we might be talking a bit about what the plans for Christmas were and not having an exact answer. But yes, on with the show. Hello and welcome to Unparliamentary Language, a podcast that asks the question, when is a deadline not a deadline? When it's a Brexit deadline. I hope you appreciated that I had the proper Christmas cracker-like pause there for everyone to guess.
You did, thank you. I'm glad. But viewers and listeners can make their own bang if they want to in the middle of that, or wear a silly hat, or do anything they wish. But yeah, it's been, have things happened since we last spoke, and not happened? But we'll get into all of that later, relating to our lovely job.
Yeah, we will. So moving into our headlines, our first headline, it's not actually a headline. I haven't pulled out a particular news article here, but I do have a tweet from the Trans Learning Partnership, who had several members of theirs, at least one of their colleagues and some professors presenting in front of the UK parliamentary committees, and I watched along with it. And this is to do with the GRA reform. So are you aware of the GRA, Rob?
So I'm going to say what I thought it was, and then you can put me right. But is it about having like recognition of what gender you are? They are making that far more difficult to do than it previously was, or keeping it the same. I remember that there are some ridiculous laws when it comes to actually, coming out as the gender you actually identify with. It was my understanding, like you have to live like that for 5 years or something before they even consider it, and that can be a huge stress on people going through that for 5 years, and they just want it recognised. And the government, I thought, was going to make it easier, and then they stopped and went, no, we're going to keep it the same. But that's my very basic understanding.
Yeah, so the Gender Recognition Act was brought in 2004. And this was, at the time, so in 2004, I was not really paying attention to this kind of thing. Let's put it that way. So I don't know what the mood around that was at the time. It was obviously progress, but I think it's one of these things where it's progress of a kind. There are lots of problems with it. And 16 years later, it's not fit for purpose. There are lots of problems with it. Other people will be able to go into far more depth on it. But basically, it's about getting a gender recognition certificate, which is basically a government issued thing that says yes, I'm a different gender to what is listed on my birth certificate. Thank you very much. And then obviously you can go on and live your life and transition and do all these other things. And the problem is it's required. Basically, this is a certificate saying the government says you have passed all the requirements to be recognised as the other gender. And as you say, it has various timeouts, timelines and things. And basically a lot of problems with it. But it was better than not having it in the first place. So it was a step forward, but now 16 years later, it's definitely like we could be doing better than this. Other countries are doing better than this. And earlier in the year, there was a whole thing about having Gender Recognition Act reform. There was a big consultation, and basically, on average, the majority of the population are fine with trans people defining themselves, etc., which is what trans people want. They want to just be able to say, I am this, and they don't have to go through a legal process to start that. Because that's very much the start of everything else, is being able to live as your gender and not like have it challenged by the courts and things like that. There's so much stuff going on. And for these people with gender dysphoria, just being able to say, this is my gender now, and self-assign would be great. That's what people want. But the problem is there is a vocal conservative, as in little c conservative kind of minority who are like, oh no, this is not okay for various reasons. They, which basically I don't want to go into because I know it would be triggering to people who are trans listening. We don't want to go into their arguments.
Yeah.
But I would say they fall on the side of bad.
Universally shitty, I would describe them as, but sorry, I know this is a you podcast, but bad faith arguments. I feel like there are arguments made by that side where I'm like, this is not a situation that happens in real life. I feel like this is an argument in bad faith.
yeah, you will see those stupid things about like bathrooms and stuff, and it's like, you know, the people who receive the most attacks in bathrooms are in fact like trans people. There's like there's always, they present this fake argument of, well, what if a man said he was a woman and then went in and assaulted someone, and you're like, well, there's literally nothing stopping him doing that now. Like this situation doesn't happen. You've just invented it, so that you can try and be like, oh, we're protecting people. Which, yeah, it's a whole problem. It's very problematic. I don't necessarily have enough time to go into everything here, and I'm probably not the right person to give you a rundown of it. There's lots of stuff out online. It'd be very easy to find. But basically, yeah, there was going to be reform. The government is going a bit conservative on it. You know, they are the Conservatives after all. And everyone kind of went, no. And like, I was involved, you know, some of my friends like shared various letters they'd written to their MPs. I took that and wrote a modified version of it that was relevant to me, because a particular person who a friend of mine, their partner's trans, and they wrote something very passionate to their MP. I wrote a kind of similar version based on their template. My MP, fortunately, is pro-trans people, so was like, yeah, sure. Obviously, in other places, you need to kind of make it felt that, you know, if you've got a Conservative MP who's on that kind of side, who's against it, you're like, come on, like get with the times. But yes, so there was a committee meeting that happened. When I say a committee, I mean a government committee, and they had various people from both sides presenting information. I would recommend watching the version which will be in the linked tweet. You can find that. It was the 2:30 evidence session. I would watch that. I would not encourage you to watch the one afterwards, because I know some people who saw that I'd said, oh, you should watch this, followed on and were like, oh, that was bad. And I was like, yeah, I watched the first like 10 minutes and yeah, there's some bad opinions there. But yes, that first bit, the two from 2:30, very informative and good. You know, various trans academics involved. It was good. And that was just kind of a thing I wanted to mention. This is an ongoing fight for the trans community, and they need people to understand that at this time. You know, so you need to help people. If people have been having a bit of a rough time, you'll have seen various things. There was recently this thing about puberty blockers that went through the courts as well.
Oh, that's it. Just dumb, in my opinion. Sorry. I was reading articles about it, and one oddly worded BBC article which kind of presented the entire case that 99% of the time there's like absolutely no issue with using them, but the article seemed to stress more on the 1% of the time it didn't, and that's maybe what swayed the courts. And it was, yeah. I'm talking from, as you can see, I haven't done the widest, deepest reading into these things, but my opinions are still strong. They're dumb to discriminate against trans people.
Yeah, pretty much. Yes, there was a person who came forward and was involved in that court case who had a bad experience, but it was more that like I think if you look through, I mean, even on the BBC, I'm not saying they're perfect about writing about trans issues, but like compared to say like certain newspapers, I won't bother to mention, like, you know, they don't have an official position of being anti, as it were. Although, yes, people have criticised their reporting in the past, and I'm sure people have plenty of examples of where the BBC have got things wrong. But it's that general problem where they're trying to get both sides, and the thing is, like, there aren't really two sides here. One thing is clearly the correct thing to do, and the other thing, like, yes, as you say, like, if one person in 100 has a bad experience, but like if 99 people out of 100 have a good experience, like, there's always these decisions to make in like medicine, and it seems like such a low incident rate. At least that's my understanding of it. But like, the whole point of the blockers is they allow you to defer actually making the decision, because legally under 18 kids can't make that decision anyway, is the point. But the idea was that they could be put on puberty blockers and then defer the decision until they're 18 without having significant changes to their bodies which will affect their dysphoria and make it worse. Again, there's a lot of stuff to read up on here, but I think it's fairly easy to find the articles explaining it, so I'll try and put some good links in. I'll try and find something, but I'll have to pull it together. I don't have it in front of me right now, but I just wanted to bring that up because it's like, it's an ongoing fight to improve the life of trans people in the UK, and it's been a few bad weeks from the purposes, you know, from legislation and stuff. So that's kind of a bright light, that evidence session. As I say, don't watch the one afterwards because it was terrible. But yes, I just wanted to highlight that. So our next headline is from The Telegraph. Masks for a year despite the vaccine.
So the big COVID news that's sort of broken whilst we've been away is that there is now a vaccine, and the UK was one of the first nations in the world to basically say, yes, this vaccine is safe to be given to the general public, and they've started the mass vaccination programme. It started off with some people over 90. So we had the first two about a week ago. I remember that the second guy who got vaccinated was called William Shakespeare, Shakespeare as well, which was just like,
yes,
hey,
everyone was talking about that.
yes. It's just like, wow, where did you find him from? But here you've got so there was quite like a lot of jubilation on the front pages, but it was worth just pointing out the Telegraph's reaction to this, that despite the fact that we've got this vaccine, Chris Whitty has said that we might have to wear masks for a year, despite that, for a number of reasons, one of which is getting the vaccine out on that scale to that many people is an exercise that I don't think has ever been done in the country, particularly not one that has to be done so quickly and so widely, because everybody has their kids have their jabs every year, right? But that's a very small proportion of the population, and you can spread that out over a year. Everybody needs to have this COVID vaccine if we want to go back to normal, which feels weird just saying that at all now. What is normal after a year of this? It does feel bizarre to think we could go back to that way. So yeah, jubilation, but also a bit of realism there from the Telegraph about how this is still going to be an uphill battle, and we're not out of the woods yet. And I feel that's kind of been reflected in some of the news that's broken like early this week about London and the tiers. I think it might just be it might be worth mentioning. I mean, are you going to be in a tier 3 area from tomorrow?
Yes,
right?
It is from tomorrow.
Yeah.
And the thing that's a bit weird about that is that I am very close to the border where I am. I'm in zone 6. I'm one of those people where my train station is the last place you can get an Oyster card to. So yeah, I'm almost as far out of London as you can be while still being in London. And it is a bit ridiculous. Like, I know we've talked about this before. Like, I completely understand why they're putting London into tier 3. Probably should have been tier 3 before. Mm-hmm. If I'm honest, I'm not going to be ranting and railing against it. I think it's the right decision. And it just seems a bit silly that they announced it one day early. I mean, I know they're trying to be like, oh, well, as soon as we made the decision, but like, you could have made the decision 7 days ago. But the fact you're doing it one day ahead of everything else with the tier 3 seems a bit weird.
Yeah.
And I can say from personal experience today that the trains were a lot busier than usual when I went in. And I would not be surprised if that's because people are like, oh, well, I can go into the office for something essential. People who haven't been, because they're like, oh, we're in tier 2, it'll be fine. And they want to have a final trip in before they're stuck in tier 3. And yeah, the thing that's funny is, of course, that tier 2 is a few hundred meters from my house. But I'm advised not to go into that area. Like, because of how things are set up. I mean, other than if I go for a walk on my own outside, in which case I think that's fine because I won't be encountering anyone else. But I'll be outside. Yeah, the other, I don't really need to go in that direction because all the shops are the other way, basically. So it's not like it's a difficult thing to follow. It shows you how ridiculous it can be if you're near the edge of something. Because before we were the same tier, but Surrey is not the same as us now. Despite the fact our address is in Surrey, but we're still in London. It's that kind of weird edge case. But yeah, I mean, we're fine with it. We were going to be staying in anyway. The plan was to stay in. I mentioned in the pre-show that I've had a lateral flow test, and I'll be having another one on Friday because they're not 100% accurate. So the setup is you book in to have 2-3 days apart just to be 100%, well, not 100% certain, but to be more certain than not that you don't have it. So my plan had already been to be like on the 18th, I would have that second test. I would then know my status and could basically hole up with the aim to meet family at some point over Christmas. But our plan was to have Christmas Day at home without seeing family and do like a Zoom Christmas meetup. We just need to make sure presents are sent to the right people, And I don't know if you've seen what the queue for the post office is like, but it'll be easier to drop. It'll be easier to drop off parcels in person, socially distanced outside, following all the rules. But obviously now we need to discuss how that worked because different family members in different tiers. But I think it is still technically possible under the rules for someone to come here, meet me outside, and we do a quick exchange kind of thing. So it's still going to happen. It was always going to be a weird Christmas, but fortunately for us, we hadn't planned to go home like I know some people had who were in tier 2 areas that are now tier 3. So it also, I mean, on that note, it does sound like they're going to change the rules about Christmas as well. There's rumours today. Yeah. And I wouldn't be surprised if by the time this airs or by next week, they're saying, the bubble thing over Christmas was a bad idea, which I think a lot of us thought it was when it was announced.
Yeah, but people have made plans, haven't they? It's trying to make plans for Christmas and seeing what you're going to do. And boy, was there a discussion about how things would work with bubbles and our Christmas, and we're in tier 2. It does seem a little, from my opinion, I can see it being very frustrating if you're in London where you've been in tier 2 and now they're saying we're going to have to go up to tier 3 because maybe tier 2 wasn't strict enough. But then in a week's time, it becomes tier 0 effectively as bubbles mix across the capital as because they could under the current Christmas rules, running from like the 23rd to the 28th, whatever that is. And then you go back into tier 3. It does seem to be like this weird juxtaposition of like, we're going to lock down, but then release it up and then lock down again. It doesn't seem to be like a steady flow, and it's a terrible position for the government to be in. I think we were discussing casually this morning about how they're in between a rock and a hard place, aren't they? They've promised everybody they can have their Christmas, and that was kind of one of the reasons for the national lockdown in November. Or at least that's the way that it was sold to the general public. It was, do this and we'll get through Christmas. But now that might not be enough. We've talked previously on this podcast about how other faiths have had to change their plans at the last minute. In particular, wasn't it? Eid, Bradford went into lockdown like on the eve of, which even at the time it was saying that was the equivalent of you having everything ready for Christmas Eve. You know, you're going round your mum's house for a big turkey, then being told, actually, no, on Christmas Day, you're going to have to spend it inside. People could be looking at that situation because hey, we were meant to go round somebody else's house for Christmas dinner. And if the Christmas rules suddenly change, then we're going to be looking for some turkey Twizzlers or something, because very unlikely that we'll get a turkey or anything like close to that, this close to Christmas. So yeah, strange times. Strange year, but the vaccine is positive news, and I'm hoping that by fingers crossed, I think the conventional wisdom, or as far as I've read around, is like maybe by summer next year you may see some form of normality coming back in with the amount of vaccines that have gone through the general population. But yes, it'll be sometime. We can't celebrate just yet, which has kind of been the government watchword, hasn't it? On the past week on the TV, they're saying it's great news, but we've got to get through winter, and yeah, I can see that being a big challenge for the country.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I mean, yeah, winter being inside, I mean, I think all the advice that we had over the summer still applies. It's better to, if you're doing anything, be outside and have that, airflow and everything. And being inside, we know, is just a bad idea. So the idea of getting together with your vulnerable relatives is not high on my list. And yeah, I appreciate if people have made plans, they're going to be upset. But I'd rather they tell us sooner rather than later, because as you say, like, I mean, the thing that happened with Eid was, I mean, I'm sure it was in some way avoidable. I definitely don't think it was unavoidable, and you wouldn't want to make that mistake again. I think we saw at the time they shouldn't have been making that mistake then of doing it like the day before. So I think the sooner they get out the message that no, Christmas is going to have to be different, the better, I think. But given what's currently going on with our government, who knows? So on that note, I think we should maybe move into our main story. Brexit. It's here again. So maybe we need to give people some background on why it is we are once again talking about Brexit. And I don't just mean the background that is our entire back catalogue, just maybe a potted summary.
Yeah. So I thought it would be good to start with about like roughly a year from now. So we're just over a year on from the election, an election which was won on the promise of Boris Johnson's oven-ready deal. He said it a million billion times during that election. And I think it's fair to say that as a result of his basic message of let's get Brexit over and done with, haven't you had enough of us talking about it for the last 4 years, he was able to win the election by 80 plus seats, giving him a mandate to push through that first deal he had with the European Union, which meant we could leave in January of this year. But a lot of people kind of assumed that the basis of that withdrawal agreement would also make up what our eventual trade deal with the EU was going to be. And that's kind of where we've got to now, where the government appears to be turning back on that and, in my opinion, rewriting history. There is a particularly infuriating interview with James Cleverly, one of the Conservative Party's chairman, and Sky News, where he basically said, oh no, I think we made it very clear to the general public that when we were talking about the oven-ready deal, that was the withdrawal agreement. We weren't suggesting that we were definitely going to do a deal with the EU for trade, etc. And I don't know, that's, from my memory, that's not what it felt like at the time. Would you agree with that? Like, if that was the message, it was kind of one said to the side and through the side of a mouth somewhere, because that's not how I read it.
No, I mean, yeah, the message was very much oven ready deal, we're ready to go, job done.
Yeah, precisely. And I think what worked for Boris, and one of the reasons he won the election last time, was that even before, before the general election was called and before we were able to get that extension and Boris put his idea of the withdrawal agreement to Parliament, there was a lot of discussion that this was when the UK was going to no deal. We weren't going to, the transition period was going to stop, the EU would lose patience with us, and Boris Johnson didn't seem to be able to do a deal. All the papers were getting ready for it, and then out of the blue, boom, he does a deal. And I think that was part of making it appear like a great win for the UK. I want to stress now, and it's a point that I've picked up from other podcasts I've been listening to on the subject of Brexit, but the UK seems determined to win these negotiations. You win them or you walk away. And my argument back was that you don't win negotiations. Neither side wins. You both...
The whole point of a negotiation is compromise.
Precisely, yeah. There's got to be a little bit of give and take. And if you don't do any give or any take, then you're going to walk away with a no deal. So the fact that Boris was able to spin that deal into a win by saying, you said I couldn't do it, but I did. I think we're kind of seeing that same rhetoric replay itself, particularly over the events of the last week. Because trust me, I know we delayed doing this podcast for a number of days and for a number of reasons as the clock slowly ticked down to Sunday. But the way I'm going to reflect on Brexit tonight is quite different from how I would have reflected it on Friday last week or Saturday, because things keep changing so fast, particularly when we get to the end of these negotiations.
Well, I mean, just for posterity here, I'm sure everyone who's listening to us now is aware of the headlines, but for anyone listening back on this in the future, a time capsule into December 2020, we were sat there a bit late on our fortnightly recording schedule, and I was like, Rob, when shall we record? And the back and forth was basically like, well, there's this discussion going on, and I think it was it Tuesday last week where they were having their big meeting with lots of fish, hilariously, where they had a lovely dinner, and the whole point was Boris was going to talk to Ursula von der Leyen and be like, okay, here's the deal. They talk it out over dinner, have some cigars and go home, kind of, how people imagine political deals are done. And then it wasn't done. And so it was like, oh, well, the absolute last day it could possibly be done is Sunday. And then we were going to record Sunday. We get to Sunday and, oh, they've moved the goalposts again. The absolute last date is the 31st of December. And I think my favourite comment I've heard from listening to Brexit Cast, as was now Newscast, was someone in government saying, oh, well, why have we got this ridiculous deadline of the 31st of December? And that's because that's the law you passed.
Yep.
It was all the current government's fault. The only reason we have this arbitrary, silly deadline is because of the current government. And
we've talked about that before with Theresa May. Like, obviously, delaying leaving the EU and the withdrawal agreement hurt Theresa May and the Conservative Party a lot. We remember when we were talking about those local election results where people really seemed to punish the two main parties and go to third parties because they were fed up of the transition period being extended. But that original transition period, and, we had all this Article 50 talk, was entirely self-imposed by that government as well. They seem to be determined on giving themselves unreasonable deadlines and then being surprised when they can't get a deal in time. It's maddening looking at it from the sidelines. We go like, ooh.
Yeah, and I mean, I understand the concept of setting yourself a personal deadline that's earlier than the actual deadline so that you get your work done. It's a technique that works on myself. So I set arbitrary deadlines that don't mean anything well in advance of when I need to hand something in, and I get the work done. But that doesn't need to apply to international treaty.
Yes. And when, I'm sure I've mentioned it several times before, but when you are looking at the type of deal that we want to make, I mean, the government has often talked about a Canada-style trade deal. You have to be reminded that it took the EU and Canada 5-7 years to get that through. So to try and do the same with the UK does seem to be a little mad. I think maybe what the UK would like is that they can copy-paste the Canada deal, replace with UK, add some bits about fish, and then you'll be fine. But as we will go on to discuss, there's a lot of reasons why the EU would struggle to accept a Canada-style deal from the UK. I can see a lot of reasons why they would reject that outright, and that's one reason why negotiations are rumbling on into the 11th hour.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we're going to get onto fishing, but I think possibly the most interesting thing about all this is it seems like, or at least the noises we've heard, are that 95% of things are covered.
Yeah.
Which is impressive, given what we're saying about it taking 5 years, 7 years to make international deals, where basically most things are agreed on, and it's just these stupid, I could say these sticking points. I think they are stupid sticking points, given how much we have to lose if this all goes wrong. And I mean, the EU will lose stuff too, but they're going to be better off than us because they're a massive internal market. Like,
Yeah.
that's what's gonna happen.
Yeah, quite simply. So should we go on about, should we unpack the main sticking points then? So we've said that it's 95% done, but we've touched on it already. Fishing is one of the big points. And it's one that I think if you were outside of the UK, it looks a little bizarre that we are getting so obsessed with our fishing industry. But from our point of view, from the UK's point of view, they say that the right to fish our own waters was an integral part of the Leave 2016 campaign, and was an often, like, one of the big talking points amongst all Eurosceptics was, we want to take back control of our fishing rights.
Which is one of these things. Sorry, it's one of these things where I don't know where it came from. I mean, I'm sure there must be a fishing lobby, right? In the same way that there were a lot of people who were farmers who said, "Oh, we don't want the EU getting in the way of our farming." Although it turns out they're all going to lose a load of subsidies and it's going to be really bad for them. But
I would argue it's kind of cultural. I would say, if you would say, like, "Oh, Britain, what do? We rule the waves. We're an island nation. We fish like."
We eat fish and chips. That's our national dish.
Yes.
Yeah. No. I understand. I understand that as well. That's there. But I like it. Kind of like when it got mentioned the first time, I was like, "Do we do much fishing? Like, we're not Norway."
Yeah.
I know we're surrounded by water, but also at the same time, I was like, I'm not aware that that's a massive part of our economy. And as it turns out, it's a third the size of Games Workshop, which was a fact that I think has been doing the rounds this week, because it's so funny that that we're going on about all this fishing, and actually it's smaller than like what is a decent sized gaming company coming out of the UK.
What is it? I read there's a joke somewhere which was something along the lines of, Games Workshop earns 3 times more than the UK fishing industry. One, of course, is a fantasy game played by middle-aged white men to enact out their wartime fantasies, and the other one is Games Workshop.
Yes.
But one of the main sticking points is, where do we draw the line? Is France allowed to fish in our waters, etc., etc.? This has led to some, what I would say, mad headlines coming out, like Wednesday, Thursday, where there were threats of gunboats to be sent into the sea to turn back French fishermen if there was a no-deal scenario, which is kind of, why do you want to effectively declare war on one of your NATO allies? And, you should be close with these people rather than fighting with them. You don't want to have gunboats to turn back fishermen as Russian subs go underneath you and do, whatever in your waters. So, yes, it's one of the main sticking points. It's one that gets brought up a lot, but personally, I feel that because it's more of as we've discussed, because it's more of a cultural point and less of an economic one, the economic argument to save our fishing isn't that sound. In fact, if we went through a no deal and we fished all the waters that we could, we definitely have a surplus of fish that we need to export to Europe anyway, so it wouldn't really be in our benefit to do that. I feel it's one of the first things to slip if we do get a deal to come through at this point. It'll be a really tough sell, particularly to the hardcore Brexiteers who see it as one of the founding principles of their movement. But ultimately, I feel it's the one where you can brush it to one side if you are a pragmatic government determined on doing a deal.
I do just want to point our listeners to an amazing Wikipedia article on the Fishery Protection Squadron, which is the name for the part of the Royal Navy designed for protecting our fish. This has been going since 1379. Currently, there are 8 ships in this. Notable commanders, Horatio Nelson. So, yes. Also, may I point you to halfway down this article where we have the first Cod War and then the second and third Cod Wars in what may be one of the best articles I've just come across by accident on Wikipedia while searching for this. So yes, I mean, okay, maybe this whole fishing protection thing is bigger than I was aware of, but yes, those headlines were absolutely ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. Like saying, we're going to barricade the ocean and stuff. It's like, well, we don't have that many ships, and I think for people who constantly go on about how we rule the waves and all of this, like, we don't have all those boats we had in World War II. We've got rid of a lot of them. But yes, yes. An ongoing thing. Let's move on from fish before I get distracted again. So that seems like that's definitely something where it seems silly to me. Like, as I said, it's a big deal for some people, but it's not a massive part of our economy. It seems like a lot of effort is going into protecting something quite small. And like, I don't know how we see that, we presumably do a lot of fishing in EU waters as well. And there has to be a bit of back and forth there, I feel. The next thing, though, is I think something that's more kind of what we've discussed a lot when we've talked about, how you can't have your cake and eat it with Ireland and stuff. And this is the concept of the level playing field.
Yeah. So this is the idea that when you've got two trading partners close to one another, as the EU and Britain will be, you want them to share a common set of standards within both. Or at least that's how the EU sees it. Because unlike a Canada deal or anything like that, the EU would be concerned about having a major trading partner that's not bound by their rules, undercutting them and being able to be, provide cheaper labour, for example, or maybe really undercut them on financial rules to make UK like a tax haven. Something that could really undermine the whole European project. The EU is obviously keen not to have that go on their doorstep. There's also other regulations you would have on things like food quality standards, etc., where it makes sense if you want to trade with that country that you're aligned in that way. Because if your food standards are lower in the UK and you try to export that to the EU and the EU's just going to reject it because we don't take chlorinated chicken, thank you very much, just to pull an example out the air, it makes sense for both sides to have similar standards. So you can have that free movement of the movement of goods and services is far simpler for your trading agreement. This is where I can kind of see the Brexiteers' point of view, because one of the reasons for leaving the EU was so they wouldn't have to be bound by Brussels rules and regulations. There was a lot, talking about Brussels EU bureaucrats saying how powerful my vacuum cleaner can be. Now in the UK, I can make my vacuum cleaner less energy efficient, but boy, can it suck a lot more. And that's one of the reasons that they left. And so UK feels that if it's going to survive out of the EU trading bloc, they need to be more flexible. They need to be able to be a bit more creative with their rules and be separate from the EU, because it's not only about being competitive around the world. It's also that you've got that freedom from the EU to make those laws as you see fit. And I think that was one of the biggest reasons why people felt they wanted to leave the EU in the first place. On top of this, the EU wants to add this thing called a ratchet clause, which means that at first you could agree that, yeah, our standards are the same, we'll keep them like that, which would be very easy to do if we were on, if January the 1st we got the trade deal and suddenly we're out of the EU and we've got that trade deal in place, because guess what? Nothing would really change between our trade deals. So it would make the transition of goods and services a lot easier. Well, the EU argues that, hey, if we as the EU decide to raise our standards in the future, the UK should automatically raise their standards as well, which is where the Brexiteers really start to not like it, because then how long are you tied to the EU and what they say? Isn't that basically being the same as being part of the EU and having to abide by European Commission decisions and European Parliament decisions, because they might just keep raising standards to try and make the UK uncompetitive in some markets. It's a big sticking point, and I think there's already been talk that the EU might be willing to drop that ratchet clause in order to secure a deal from the UK. And I feel it's the one where there's the most, you can see most of the economic downsides for the UK having to abide by EU rules in some cases. I think it's sensible for trade and services when you are involved in any trade negotiation, you'll always have to have some alignment on standards, because otherwise one party is going to reject the others, and what's the point of having a trade agreement? It's a trade agreement in the first place. But I can see why, part of that big argument was we want to be free from these EU laws. What's the point of being free if we've just got to abide by them because we've signed up with this deal? So I'd say that is the biggest sticking point, and that's one of the reasons why the talks haven't advanced as much as they should.
But at the same time, these talks are still ongoing.
Yes. Yeah, precisely. I think it's...
And I think we have mention of some progress, which is why, I think if there was no progress at all, the EU would have just said, go away, because, they have their own interests to protect. At the end of the day, the attempts at a deal are going on. So what progress has there been that's been announced? As we said there's 95% of 95% or so sounds done, but there's also been a few fairly big announcements in the last week that let's start maybe with Northern Ireland, which I think was a surprise after all this concern that would be really difficult. What happened there?
Yeah, essentially, the UK and the EU have come to an agreement in Northern Ireland that even in the event of no deal, they will allow goods to cross over the border relatively unchecked, so that can be a smooth transition between the only land border then existing between the EU and the UK. The Northern Ireland would still have to stay within that single market customs union, so there is effectively still a border down the Irish Sea, but that was already what was stated as part of the withdrawal agreement in the first place. Previous listeners might remember that the UK tried to undermine the withdrawal agreement by passing the Internal Markets Bill that essentially undid a lot of that stuff, and that's why it was so controversial. That's why it broke international law, because it was going against a treaty we'd formally signed with the EU that we wouldn't try and break this. Essentially, the UK and the EU have come to an agreement that, we'll drop those controversial bits from the Internal Markets Bill. Goods will be able to pass relatively freely between Northern Ireland and Ireland. There will still be some checks, but the UK was adamant that they didn't want any sort of EU border station in Northern Ireland. They felt that that would cause tension or look particularly bad for the UK. So essentially, the EU has agreed to hot desk and borrow places of the UK so they can conduct these checks. This was all negotiated by the man himself, Michael Gove, who said you hear some things, like, it's very rarely that I watch like a politician say something and I'm instantly angry. But Michael Gove said something particularly striking when he'd come to this agreement. He explained it and he said, well, essentially what Northern Ireland will be getting is they'll get the best of both worlds. They'll be able to get trade from the UK and trade from the EU seamlessly, which led many people screaming at their mobile phone screens saying, we had that best of both worlds. We had it until you decided to leave the European Union. Why are you selling this as a good thing now? Why can't we have that too? So it was slightly bizarre to hear Michael Gove, one of the prime Brexiteers, selling it in that sense. But I think it does go a way to show that both sides were very keen to avoid any hard border situation in Northern Ireland happening. And that's been quite a positive note of how sincere how serious the two sides are with dealing with one another. If they wanted to be truly vindictive, either side could have refused and maybe forced a hard border. But that does seem like, the way we've talked about that in the past, it does seem unimaginable and would undoubtedly cause tension. So it is a big relief that has passed. It won't be completely plain sailing for Northern Ireland. The agreement only deals with goods. So if there's any service changes or people banking between the two areas, that type of industry could be hit particularly hard if there is a no Brexit, and that the effects will be seen the most there between people who trade and work and do services across Northern Ireland and into Ireland. But at least it means that food won't be rotting at the border as they struggle to try and get in. So that's been one positive piece of news, I think, that's come out of the negotiation so far.
For people who are wondering how long we've been talking about what might happen with Northern Ireland and the Irish border, I just found that it's episode 107 of our podcast where we first talked about that. So that's a good 3 years ago. Not to the day, because our recording pattern has slightly shifted, but yeah, we've been wondering about that for a long time, and kind of surprising still how sudden that was. We just kind of, the government kind of gave up. So next thing that got discussed was flights. How are they going to solve flights? And I think there were also some other suggestions from the EU, not just flights, about how things could progress in the event of a no deal to prevent there being absolute chaos. Yeah,
so I think I just picked up on flights because it's the easiest one, and it's one that's been discussed in the past. Essentially, like, UK planes would have to have permission from the EU to land in their territory and vice versa. But obviously, if suddenly everything shut down on January 1st, that would cause huge disruption. So there's already been discussion between the two sides, basically saying, you can have a temporary 6-month allowance to have our planes in your country and you can have yours in ours. But again, that's not necessarily stability. 6 months is still a short-term fix, but it shows that both sides are unwilling to stop things entirely. I don't know what you've heard about goods and services, particularly at ports, because it was my impression that I know that the postal service and life is weird at the moment, that people are being stretched as people order things more for Christmas gifts, etc., and that might lead to some of the ports getting particularly busy. But I know that there's been chaos at the ports recently with like food rotting coming in, I think that was a result of France adding like an extra 30-second check to some goods in preparation for Brexit, and it just showed how what little a change can happen to have a real effect on your supply line going forward. If a no deal was to come into effect on January the 1st, I would fear for how much we would get stuff in. But I don't know if you've heard differently about what they propose to get around that in the short term.
The thing I was referencing, and maybe some of it has now been superseded by the ongoing negotiations, is there was basically the EU released a set of, in the event of no deal, here's some things that could be kept going for like 6 months as they currently are. Basically a way of saying, let's, if everything goes to pot, here's a way to give you a chance to negotiate a bit more. But I don't know if the current state of the negotiations has overridden that. I just know that was the story about a week ago.
I think that seems very likely. There's been some talk and some quite big headlines about the fact that one that sticks in my mind in particular was the Daily Mail, I think, saying Angela Merkel wants Britain to crawl through broken glass. And there's a theme from those papers that the EU wants to punish the UK for leaving the EU. Personally, I don't think that is true. And I think you can see from these temporary 6-month agreements that they are willing to put in place, you can see there is some good faith there. Because if they really wanted to mess with us, then cutting off all of that access, refusing to deal on Northern Ireland, like that would be the ultimate punishment. But the fact that there is a negotiation there shows that I think that both sides are negotiating in good faith. The biggest sticking point is that I believe that the UK media, or at least some parts of the UK media, is trying to frame it as EU bad, UK good. Boris needs to stick it to them and make them crack and make them accept a deal from the mighty, mighty UK. And yeah, I feel that it's that kind of rhetoric that almost makes a no deal more likely, or at least seems to be happening the past few days. That rhetoric has notably gone down a little bit since the Sunday extension, is my impression. There's still a bit of back and forth, of course, there always will be, but we'll likely see that ratchet up as the 31st approaches, or whenever. I think my big question is that when we were talking about film, or when we talked about recording this podcast, I said, it probably needs to get done by Thursday because it needs time to go through Parliament, because they must delay Parliament for Christmas and they must all go on holiday. But I imagine that now they'll have to bring everybody back to vote on a bill that goes through, because it's got to be approved by both the EU and UK parliaments before it goes into law, and the clock is certainly ticking on that. It would have to be a super speedy resolution to get it through Parliament.
Yeah. I have struggled to find the thing I was looking for. But basically, I'm pretty certain that sometime last week, there was, like, the EU basically said, here's what we could offer you. And they kind of put it out alongside the discussions so that people could see that they were trying to be reasonable. I think that was the idea. But to try and downplay this, the UK is doing the best thing here, rhetoric that's going around. And that was when Boris was saying the no deal was very, very likely. And before he said there'd be an Australia-type deal, which, as we know, is a no deal.
And did you hear the ex-Australian PM's Robinson talk about that? Scott Morrison talk about that?
No, I mean, I've seen there's something from Malcolm Turnbull, basically, talking about it. But,
maybe it was Malcolm Turnbull then. It was one of the ex-Australian PMs saying, I had an Australia-type deal with the EU, and trust me, you don't want that. We had some very specific agreements about wine and some things we exported to them, but it was still a real struggle to get goods and services from them that we wanted on WTO terms, which is essentially what an Australia-style deal is. I've talked about it in the past, but the reason they call it an Australia-style deal is because you think of Australia and you think it's all nice and sunny and they're like us, that'll be fine. But they might as well call it a Mongolia-style deal or an Afghanistan deal. Yeah. It's the same either way. I think just Australia type is to give it a fancy, that's not so bad. Australia still is nice. It's a nice country. Yeah. Maybe one of the reasons why they don't need a certain deal with the EU is because they are on the other side of the world, literally.
They're not their nearest trading partner.
Correct.
As is the case for us.
Yeah, or their nearest 23 trading partners or whatever it is. So that's where it changed.
I have now found that article. Maybe we'll talk about it here. Might cut this. I don't know. But it was the EU's contingency plans because there was a chance of no deal. So there'd be the provision of certain air services between UK and EU for 6 months, provided the UK does the same. Allow aviation safety certificates to be used in EU aircraft without disruption to avoid grounding. Ensure basic connectivity for road freight and passenger transport for 6 months, provided the UK reciprocates. And to allow the possibility of reciprocal fishing access for UK and EU vessels in each other's waters for 1 year or until an agreement is reached. And then I think there was a lot of Brexiteers saying, oh, no, that's unacceptable. We want our waters back now. And it's like, well, you're going to solve it then? Because I think that's the thing. So I think this was them trying to show, look, we're being reasonable here. We've got these ideas in place where basically the rules continue as they have, assuming we also do it in return. But then I think the way the UK has been acting has maybe put a damper on that thought.
It does sound, I mean, that's the EU saying, yes, things can continue as the way they are for an extended period of time. But adding that fishing one at the end does seem to be a particular jab to Brexiteers, as in, even if you get a no deal, if you want the basic rights to stuff, you'll still have to give up a little bit of your fishing waters, which maybe is another push for them to be like, hey, do the proper deal and give a little concession on your fishing waters, because that will be a lot easier for you rather than this bare bones agreement that we'll have to get us through 6 months.
So, Rob, in your honoured opinion, do you think we're going to have a deal or a no deal, given we have, as we've said, 16 days to approve and pass such a thing?
So I think we are going to get a deal, and it's precisely because I don't think the UK is ready for a no deal by any stretch of the imagination, particularly with all the stress that businesses have had through COVID-19 and, you know, shutdowns that will be happening. We've talked about London going into tier 3, and the economic repercussions of that will be huge. To add another layer of stuff that business has to deal with on January the 1st, to me seems deeply irresponsible by the government. And the fact that all we've seemed to done so far to prepare business is kind of run a couple of adverts on TV saying you should go to this website and find out what you've got to do. And speaking to, sorry, I haven't spoken to business leaders, but hearing other business leaders talk about what that entails is they go to the website, they click a link, they go down this little rabbit hole, and then the information just stops and they don't know what to do. And the reason for that is basically the UK is still in negotiations with the EU. They're not quite sure what no deal will look like until you definitely know you're not going to do a deal, right? Because if you were going to no deal and you were determined on it, I think Boris Johnson would have declared, when he originally said talks were over in the middle of October, he would have said, right, no, we're not doing a deal. Now we've got 2 months to prepare the entire country for the shock that's about to happen, right? And that would be, if you were going to do no deal responsibly, you'd have to do it in that way, shape or form. If they get to the talks on the 31st and say, shrug their shoulders and go, sorry guys, looks like it's a no deal, then all these businesses that haven't had time to prepare or thought there was going to be a deal anyway will suddenly find themselves on the back foot. And on top of that, they've got all of the COVID stuff that they're still recovering from 2020. There was a recent survey done in October that said a third of all small businesses in the UK thought the Brexit transition period would be extended, which shows that a lot of businesses definitely would be underprepared if this happened. We're already seeing chaos in the ports, as I've said. There has been some leaked stories in the Telegraph about the UK government willing to find billions of pounds to help industries affected by Brexit, farming, fisheries, etc. But it's worth pointing out the government has already spent a lot of money on furlough schemes, helping to support businesses during the coronavirus pandemic. That would clearly only be extended even more if we have a no deal, and the effects would be more acute. So why would you put your own people through that? I think
the only thing I'd raise there is I did hear when talking about coronavirus specifically, that the government credit rating is still pretty good despite the fact that they've spent so much money on coronavirus this year. So getting an extra 1 billion might not be terribly hard from that point of view. Of course, the thing is, if there's then economic decline due to Brexit, how easy will it be to maintain that credit rating? Because obviously it's bad when your country gets downgraded.
Yes, yeah, precisely. And I think you've hit the nail on the head there. It's fine at the moment, but we've got to deal with Europe, and we'd probably be in the same boat as the rest of Europe if we were trying to recover after COVID in 2021. If we've also got no deal on top of that, that maybe makes us a less attractive trade partner for potential people who want to help economic recovery or lend us money and we can get through it. I feel that COVID has taken up a lot of people's thinking time this year with good reason. And before then, the headlines were dominated by Brexit. A year ago, we were still talking about it, and it seemed like a much bigger thing, and it dominated politics. Now it's not. People have rightly thought when it happened on January the 31st, oh yeah, okay, I can kind of forget about that now, not remembering that we still had these talks to go through. I also think that we're going to do a deal because Boris Johnson can make it appear like a win again for him by the fact that we've had so many headlines of it's going to be a no deal, we're definitely going to walk away, I'm being the strong man and walking away from all of this, that if he pulls one out of the bag again, then he can sell that as a massive triumph of diplomacy. Like, nobody thought I could do it, everybody thought I was doing the wrong thing, but here I am saving the economy, and I've got this tiny concession for fishermen, or something along those lines, where he can get one thing out of the EU and try and spin it as a major win. But as we mentioned earlier in this podcast, I feel that negotiations shouldn't be won by either side. It's something where you compromise and walk away and feel that both sides should be happy with it. It'll be interesting to see how the government tries to spin this. And I deeply hope that we can get a deal, because if in our next podcast I'm talking about the realistic prospect of what happens in a no deal, then yeah, we've talked about it before, and I think it is universally agreed that that is the worst of all worlds. There were surveys conducted recently with like Leave and Remain voters, and even amongst Leave voters, the majority of those want to deal with the EU. They feel that a no deal is a bad idea, and I would struggle to see Boris Johnson remaining very popular with the general populace if he put the country through the pain of a no deal on top of everything else it's had to go through in 2020.
Yes, no, I don't think I have anything to say really here. I think I agree with you. I think fingers crossed we get some kind of deal. I think we've always, that the position of this podcast has always been that we want some kind of deal. Obviously we wanted to not be in this position in the first place.
Would be easier,
but given where we are, some kind of deal is better than no deal in my opinion. And I think precisely for the reasons that Brexiteers don't want a deal, I think some kind of deal would be better. Just a bit of levity, I think, to add on the end. I don't know if you're aware of r/Brexit on Reddit, but I only just discovered it. It's full of some jokes. I've posted a few in the chat, mostly memes, a bit of actual news, but maybe that'll help you get through this trying time. Also, they do have the brilliant. They have a tag, Project Reality, which is for like real things where people are suddenly realizing their problems. From the Daily Mail, who actively campaigned for Brexit. It's enough to make you choke on your sangria. From New Year, 500,000 Brits can only stay in their holiday homes on the continent for 3 months at a time. And as these families tell, their dreams have turned to dust. It's almost like that's what you voted for. I mean, I'm not saying necessarily those families in the continent, but like that's literally the point of Brexit.
Yeah.
What did you expect to happen? You can't keep your holiday home in the Algarve while also wanting Brexit.
I believe there was a Mail article also run about like if there's a no deal Brexit, 10 things you can do to help the British economy, all of that jazz. And number 6 or 7 on this list was like buy a second home, which may say something to who. How realistic that list is for people who supported Brexit. Was it really a rising up of like the lower classes in order to reject the EU, or was it mostly a rich person's game so that they could buy a second home? It's just a very odd article, all involved. But it didn't seem very in touch with the common man at that point, or a young person struggling to buy their first home. Never mind get a second one in the country and trying to flip it when it goes it all goes sour. Sorry, these memes are very good memes.
Yes, the best memes. We have the best memes. Only the best memes here. So I think before we get distracted by memery, we've been recording long enough. Thank you as always for listening. You can find us at /r/unparliamentary while you're over there subscribing to our Brexit. You can find us at parliamentary.observer, our website, where you'll find all our episodes. You can comment on our episodes, and you can subscribe through any podcast app, but there's a whole load of links on the website. You can find us on Facebook as Unparliamentary Language. You can find us on Twitter and Instagram at Unparl Podcast. And I don't think there's anything else for me to say other than it's good night from me.
And it's good night from him. Bye.
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 Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Hi, have you ever wondered what would happen if you took the schoolyard conversation of which one of my favourite fictional characters would win in a fight? Well, wonder no more. Join me, Chris, and my co-host Matt every other Sunday for Mish Mash Mayhem, and you can find out.
Rob's on the phone. What shall we do? Because Rob's on. Here's a slight musical interlude. In the bleak midwinter.
All right, I'm back.
Oh, I'd only just done the first verse.
Cool.
I happen to have 100 Carols for Choirs next week because I'm supposed to be... Well, I mean, I've not said I'm definitely doing it, but someone wanted some carols recorded for some services. I was like, I could maybe do that, but I haven't had any time because life. So yeah.
You know what?
Anyway.
That's fine, because in one of the most famous Christmas songs of all time, Wonderful Christmas Time by Paul McCartney, he suggests the children have practice carols all year long, and then the children sing, and their words are ding dong, ding dong, ding dong, which you'd expect more after an entire year of practice, to be honest. But anyway.
But they were very good ding dongs. So,
part of, the reason to leave the UK. Sorry, again.
I almost hit disconnect as opposed to stop recording, which is the thing I was supposed to do.